Hello, and welcome to POMA Does, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine in Pennsylvania for our members and their patients. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, and welcome to the next edition of POMA Does, the POMA podcast. This is the podcast sponsored by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. I'm John Kalata. I'm an osteopathic family physician practicing in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm also program director for LECOM's Family Medicine Residency program. And tonight we're joined by Dr. Elizabeth Ramsey, a practicing psychiatrist from Meadville, Pennsylvania. I have Dr. Dustin Martin, who's one of our family medicine residents, Dr. Stephanie Peck, who's one of our psychiatry residents, and Dr. Shane Loss, who's one of our family medicine residents. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to keep cool in the heat of the match. And specifically, we're going to talk about some coping strategies and how really to handle the stresses of the application process, the match, and the post-match process for those of you who are entering the match and entering residency next year. So with that, I'd like to introduce each of our participants tonight and tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll talk about everybody's journey on how everybody got to where they got. So Dr. Ramsey.
Hello, Elizabeth Ramsey. I'm originally from Virginia. I attended the VIA College of Osteopathic Medicine. I completed my psychiatry residency at LECOM and then moved to Meadville, Pennsylvania. I've been practicing there since 2014.
Awesome. Great. Dr. Martin.
I'm Dustin Martin. I attended LECOM's Seton Hill campus in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm currently completing a first year of family medicine residency at LECOM Health.
Great, Dustin. Thanks. Dr. Peck.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Peck. I went to LECOM Medical School and Erie as well, and I also am completing my first year at LECOM Health as a psychiatry resident.
Great, welcome, thanks. Dr. Loss?
I also attended Lake Campus, and I'm currently one of the family medicine residents. The family medicine residency program, I did the transitional year.
Great, okay. Great. I think the first thing is, for those of you who are going to enter the match, if you're a second-year student, early third-year student, really starting now to worry about how to approach the application process, I'd like to maybe talk just for a little bit about the process itself, and then we'll talk about how each of you got to where you got to. So ERIS, the application service. Dustin, can you talk for a minute about that and how you approached it?
Well, I think that the biggest piece of advice I have when it comes to ERIS is to have everything in early. It's really stressful when you're approaching deadlines or when something's opening up because there's so much overload and there's a lot of technical issues with it. So I would look at all those deadlines. I would have everything in early. Make sure, you, especially with letters of recommendation, because that's kind of out of your control. Make sure that you're staying on top of your letter writers who said they would write letters for you. Have those in as early as possible. Other things like personal statement things, you could, do those at your own leisure, but make sure that you have everything finalized and submitted, in advance of when those applications are being released.
Stephanie, what about you when you had to apply? ERIS is the application service, and there's a lot of components to it. Does stuff happen automatically, or do you have to work to get everything together for that application service?
So that I recall for ERAS, I think the easiest part was filling out what looks like an application, right? So it's what you would kind of expect to be on a resume per se, your biographical information, kind of where you went to school, where you graduated. That's one of the easiest things to do. I think I tackled that like into making my account. Like I just dedicated one day to set up my account and then just tackle this information because it really didn't take very long. But like what Dustin was pointing out was that you're going to have these deadlines and they'll show you the deadlines. The first thing I did, if you're someone that procrastinates, write the deadlines down, because then you have them like feasible, it's on a piece of paper. And then if you're really bad like me and you really procrastinate, I like changed the deadlines in my mind to like an earlier date than what the real deadline was. especially for things that I had control over, like the personal statement. Things that it's just really easy to push off, and then it's like, oh my God, it's due in a month. So big thing, A, make the account. B, you're going to want to fill out that demographic, like get the easy stuff out of the way, that little application part, and then make it feasible, right? Like write out the deadlines. And one of the biggest things that I think I wish I would have been, and I probably was told, but I wish I would have emphasized, was as a third year medical student, start asking people for letters. Like the earlier you can, obviously you want to make connections with these physicians. You want to have actually spent time with them. But the second you feel like you made a connection with someone, I mean, you need to just put them on the list, because that is one of the most stressful things, is waiting for somebody else to hand something in on your behalf. And they're being asked to write multiple letters. So just being really mindful. If you really feel like you had a good connection with someone, ask them. It's never too early to ask someone for a letter at all. So yeah, I think that's my best point for that.
I think one of the strongest letter writers that I've seen is on this screen, and that's Dr. Ramsey. I think I don't know if you're a tough nut to crack, Dr. Ramsey, but I think, Beth, that when your letters are meaningful, and I think it's because that connection gets made between the student and you. So can you just comment about when people approach you as an attending, is there trepidation in their voice? Are they afraid to talk to you? Are they worried? And how do you talk to them about how they should be approaching even the process?
Well, I think that there are some nerves involved with asking the question, because I think there's always a fear that perhaps the person is going to say no. But most students, by the time they ask, are fairly confident that the answer is going to be yes. And so, especially if they've done really well, and I try to give feedback throughout the rotation so people know how they're doing. That's super important. And I also allow students to interview and take part in what we're doing. So then that way they feel like they belong. What's super important with writing a letter is having the CV. I think that adds the personal touches that are necessary to writing a good letter. So I always ask students to email me that information so I can reference it in the letter. And then also just remembering specific details about them, because I think it strengthens the quality of the letter. And then including the email, this is the deadline where I need this letter. And because sometimes you get told and it just goes to the back of your mind, and we have so many things to do electronically these days. And unfortunately, the ERIS application process isn't easy to remember and to follow. And so having that ahead of time and knowing the deadline gives me plenty of time to not only write the letter, but then also to upload it.
Yeah, I think that the point that you made, Stephanie, about paying attention to deadlines and really being early about it probably lessens people's stress. Because I don't think some of this stuff can be done as an all-nighter.
Absolutely.
And I know when I was looking at applications, a lot of them came in at the 1st of October, and there was a big rush. And then folks who maybe got their stuff in late, I didn't get a chance to go back and look about the late bloomers, when people's applications were complete late. So they were late interviewers, and I think that was maybe to their detriment. One thing I found that I think a lot of students struggle with is the personal statement, because it's personal and you want it to stand out and be unique. Shane, did you find that was tough for you to do?
Yeah, that's very tough. I hate talking about myself in general.
Everybody says that. And I guess, what advice do you think you'd give somebody when they have to write a personal statement? And we'll ask everybody this, but Shane, what do you think?
I mean, I guess one of the big things is give yourself time to make changes. Jot down some basic notes. If this is basic couple things I want to talk about, one or two clinical examples that coming to you for what field you want, maybe one key point of why you wanted to be a doctor or something, and like a fun fact or something, but don't overdo it, and give yourself time for plenty of revisions, and then ask your colleagues to read it. Some of your fellow med students that are good writers, especially, maybe one of your attendings at your school or where you're rotating, people in your specialty. If you want to do psychiatry, ask Dr. Ramsey to review your thing and make sure you're kind of on point for why you're saying you want to be a psychiatrist, that it makes sense to them. But so that's kind of what I would say. And then one other thing is, you could also, once you have your same general personal statement down. You can do little personalizations at the end of your statement. That's kind of the last thing you do for specific places if you wanted to, but don't beat yourself up over that.
Dustin, did you have a hard time with a personal statement?
I have a very hard time. It's difficult, especially the writing style. You want it to be a little bit flowery, eye-catching, fun to read, but science majors not necessarily accustomed to that kind of writing. So having somebody else read over it or some kind of outside opinion is never a bad thing.
Stephanie, was it easy for you?
No, not at all. I think everyone when you reach this stage, I feel like a requirement in medical school is like you hate writing about yourself because we had to do it to get into medical school. We have to do it to get into residency, and it just stinks every time. It's just so tough, especially if you're hard on yourself. So it's like, you're trying to pull out these characteristics that others around you might say. I think what I did was I had some of my friends read it. So I had a few friends in medical school that were very critical and weren't fluffy writers, because they helped find oh, well, you sound really passive there, change that wording. And so I thought it was great to have other people read it. I read it multiple times. I actually had my therapist read it as well, to kind of point out hey, why didn't you say this about yourself? And I was really glad I made that move. So just the more people you can have read it, the better. And don't be afraid to brag about yourself in a professional way.
How do you think, what would you advise someone to do to get over the anxiety of writing something like this?
Yeah. Well, again, I think you're writing this for a purpose, and the purpose is to share why you matter to this program. And so I think building the foundation from that purpose, you have to do it well. So you have to explain to someone that doesn't know you why you should be around them and why you should work for them or with them. In that case, you just put it in perspective. So this is what you have to do, and you want to get somewhere, and you're competing with other people. And so it's just like any other competition, basically. You just have to put the work in.
I would agree with all of that. Approach me. I tell them just to get started. Start somewhere. Because that initial step, they'll have everything done. Everything that each of you spoke about, they'll get everything done. And it's just all the personal statement, just get started, I think. And having people not being afraid to have a confidant or someone you trust look at it. Someone that I think is.
I had multiple drafts too. I had a few versions of ways that because as a mom, I was like, well, I could portray myself in this light, or I could portray myself in that light. I think ultimately I just had multiple versions and tried to combine them and had people read the versions, and kind of went from there. It's one of the most difficult things to do. And I think it's usually the thing that we procrastinate the most because it's not fun.
Yeah, that's great. So there's a lot of great advice to students coming in. Understanding that everybody's in the same boat, but when you're having to write it, you sure feel like you're on an island a little bit. Yeah. So now that the application's done, and you have to interview, because now it's all about the match and it's about interviewing well. I'd like to maybe pick each of your brains. First of all, maybe Stephanie, talk about your interview process and how you approached it, because I know you interviewed for more than one specialty. And I think sometimes people struggle with the old question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And maybe there's people are looking for a plan, a plan A and plan B. And I believe that people end up in places for a reason, but how did you approach it?
So it was tough doing multiple specialties. So just to explain a little bit. So I really wanted to match in psychiatry. Born and raised in Erie, Pennsylvania. I wanted to stay in Erie, Pennsylvania. I have one option for psychiatry here. So my other two backups were family medicine, both in Erie, Pennsylvania. So it was really tough being in this tight-knit city and knowing the program directors at both places for both specialties, and being asked the question, what do you want to do? So, there was, I don't want to lie. And it's hard because you're in this space where you're like, oh my God, I don't want to lie to them. But I also don't want to put myself, I don't want to be number 50 on their list because they don't think I want to be here. So I think I tried to be as honest as possible, in my word choice. So, I do recall phrases such as, well, I really love psychiatry, but I also really love family medicine. And I can practice psychiatry in family medicine. So it's not like I'd be giving up all of what I love. And I think at the end of the day, just trying to find a way to be as honest as possible, but also trying to put yourself somewhere on the that was tough. It is really tough because I don't know. I personally feel like I hate feeling like I'm lying. So, I knew you really well. I knew the St. Vincent program director really well. So it's like, how do I say this without saying like, hey guys, I just want psych. But I think too, like highlighting if you had the opportunity to rotate with someone, highlighting on what you were able to do with them. Instead of maybe directly answering the question, just, I really love that I was able to do OMT when I was in your clinic. I felt like I really fit in there. I got along really well with the residents in your program, which is how I felt in every place that I went. So being able to just explain how you meshed well, and things of that nature. But it is tough when you're asked that question. For psych, it was a lot easier because I knew I wanted to go into psychiatry and they knew I wanted that. And so really it was just like a confirmation, like, hi, I really do want to be here, but just applying for one place is really very scary. So I had to apply elsewhere, or else I would have felt like I was putting all of my eggs in one basket, kind of thing. And most places are understanding, especially if you've had the opportunity to rotate there. And I could speak volumes for how essential and important it is. If you really want to be somewhere, being there in person as a student is just so helpful.
Great. So there was no guilt in practicing your lines then when the interview process came on.
I did practice some phrases. Again, I'm very open and honest about the fact that I have a therapist, and I think that more people that do should be. So I talked to her about it because I did feel bad, especially knowing you all. So for me, it was like, how can I explain this to them so that I'm on the board, but also I'm not like blatantly lying? And we did work through a few things. I wanted to stray away from like writing a script though, because I didn't want to feel and sound robotic. Like I didn't want you all to feel like, oh wow, she's rehearsed this a few times. So
I've been in some interviews where you can tell there was a script and it was very obvious.
Yes. And so I just trying to I didn't want to also be like, obviously we're here and I'm like looking at my paper, like, yeah, I really wanted to, so it's like trying not to have something written down and a script prompted, but I had the conversation with my therapist. I had the conversation with people I care about close to me enough that by the time one of you asked me, it was like, okay, I knew I was going to be asked this question. Here we go.
All right, so let's pass it around the room, and I have a question for Beth in a second. But Dustin, do you think at any point in your journey did you feel guilty about things that you said, or that maybe you were too practiced when you approached your interviews?
I don't think so. I don't think in my interview experience I ever said something that was so far from the truth that I was like, oh, I really misled this person or anything like that. And there is certainly you don't feel guilty for rehearsing lines or practicing lines, as you said, because there are going to be questions that you're going to be asked over and over again. And if you don't have a good answer for those questions, I think that's going to reflect negatively on you to some extent. Why didn't they have a good answer to this question? But to answer your question, no, I don't feel like there was ever a time when I felt guilty for anything any answer that I gave.
Good. Shane, how about you? Like, I know you wanted maybe to get back closer to home and ended up closer to us. In your interview process and your application process, can you talk about the most stressful things for you, particularly having a family and a wife who's gainfully employed, having a great job downstate? I think we're seeing more students now who have lots of family commitments. Can you speak for a minute about that and how you dealt with that?
I mean, I guess some of it was anywhere that I was going to go, we wanted to have some kind of connection. We didn't want to be in a place that was entirely new if we were going to be near like the family. We have places that we know. I mean, I lived in Greensburg for the first couple years of med school. Went to grad school in Philadelphia, so I kind of had some places that were familiar with the area. kind of the big thing in the planning if things were going to turn out where we'd end up to be initially.
Good. So I think each of you had kind of you came into it with honesty and with eyes wide open, and I think that really came through when we interviewed you each for our program. Beth, what do you think? What do you think the one takeaway of all this would be for a student who's got to maybe manage a whole bunch of competing thoughts or competing things when they're getting ready to choose and getting ready to interview? In other words, I ask students when they're interviewing with me, what are the most important criteria for you when it comes to selecting a program? Because when the rank comes out, you have to ultimately say this place is 1, this place is 2, this place is 3. What do you think? How do you think they should really approach that from a mental health or a keeping their cool point of view?
So I think what I've heard is preparation is probably the most important aspect. I don't think it's unreasonable to think about potential questions, formulate your answers in advance. But I think that having that preparation will help reduce the anxiety related to the interview because you've been thinking about it, you've been practicing. And we all know, that's the whole point of what we do is practice makes you better at something. So you're more able to think on the spot if there's a new question, and being honest, of course. If you're honest, then you don't have to try to figure out a way to make the other person happy because it's coming from the heart. So you can never have too much of that. And that's what our patients expect from us as well. So you're laying the foundation for what you're going to do in the future. There's always going to be some anxiety when you're competing because there's probably going to be somebody that's doing something better than you. But what is it that you can offer to the program? And I think looking around, that's one of the benefits to doing an audition rotation is you can see the people where you're at and you can make the assessment. Do I like these people? Do I want to work with these people? Do I want to spend time with these people outside of work? So seeing who's around and where you're going to best fit in, I think are extremely beneficial things. It's not, COVID's made everything way more difficult. It's not quite the same meeting someone virtually as it is in real life. Alas, is where we are. So you just try to do the best you can. A lot of people have done programs, I guess, in the same area where they went to school. So that kind of helps because at least you are familiar with some of the folks before you start. So I think that's another benefit. And then just hopefully it works out the way it's supposed to.
So thank you. If you had one thing, Dustin, to tell a student when it comes time to the rank and as they approach match day, prior to match day, what's the one thing you tell him or her to do? You've gone on your interviews, you've suffered through Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, and now you have a list of places. What's the one thing you tell them to do when it's time to rank?
I would say that, well, take as many interviews as you can, rank every interview, unless you really feel like this is, I'd rather not match than match at this place. So you should rank everywhere that you interviewed. It's difficult with COVID to really get the feel for a lot of these places and these interviews. At least it was last year when I was doing it. So it can be difficult to should I rank this place in Philly that I never rotated at, or this place in New York that I never really rotated at. It's difficult, but just go with what your gut tells you. The vibe that you picked up from the program director there, from the senior residents there, it can be tough to make those decisions.
Great. How about you, Shane? What do you think? The one thing you tell people when it's time to start ranking programs?
11:45 p.m. changes to your list. Yeah, I guess when you're making your list, think about, are there reasons? Hopefully you're going to have lots of interviews where you're like, I could be very happy at this place. Might not have everything up, but I could see myself very happy there. Also think about some of the places where there might be some things you really like, but there might be some real things that drew up a red flag to you that you didn't like. It's right in downtown of a big city, you don't like being in the city, or somebody, one of the first-year residents that you're going to spend the next 2, 3, 4 years with, depending on your program, just really rub you the wrong way, and you don't think about just kind of the culture or something. Try and think of some of the things for some programs that would be a reason not to go there, and just reasons maybe other places a little bit more higher on your list.
Great. Stephanie?
Yeah, so I think kind of spinning off of what Shane just said, and honestly going back to what you said, Dr. Kalata, what is it about the program that you like? When you ask students that question, I think that's what we should be asking ourselves, when you're ranking is what do I value the most? Like what are the pros versus cons, if you may, but I guess within your pros column, I think that there are things that you're like not willing to sacrifice on. Like there has to be some kind of boundary or expectation for the program. And for residency is tough. Like no matter where you go for intern year, it's gonna suck. Like it's gonna be really hard. And that's just how it is. So you could look at it from like, oh, they have this call and they have all the calls gonna suck. Like you're an intern. It's tough. So what are you not willing to sacrifice on? For me, it was feeling like I'm at home. Like I love my family. I love being at home with my family. So if I'm going to be somewhere more than I'm at home, I want to really like the people that I'm working with. I want to feel like I'm at my second home. So that was a really big criteria for me. And then if you're like, well, crap, I feel like I'm at home in more of these places, honestly, trust your gut. Like that's my biggest thing is like, I'm someone that I feel like I have intuition and I follow that. So if you're one of those people, this is one of those times where you go with your intuition and don't make last minute changes. Like, just like they say, when you take a test, don't erase it. Don't stay off of there. You submit it and you let it go and you move on.
Great. I'd like to thank each of you for being here, and we'll continue here in just a second with our next episode. Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.